appreciate all of you guys that either weren't interested in what's new in Perl 5.2.2 or were willing to look at the release notes. I'm Joseph Hall. This is a series of unfortunate requests. If you guys recognize the name, and you'll probably recognize the picture from the DVD. Real quick, I wouldn't normally do this because you guys probably don't care, but I do want to point out that I'm not that guy. I introduced myself to Randall a couple days ago, and I said, "Hi, I'm Joseph Hall," and he gave me this look that said, "No, you're not." So it is a great book, and I have a copy, and it is one of the books that I use to learn Perl. So this is, the noise is kind of, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. I've been using Perl since about 1999 or so. Just started hacking on it when I was working in a tech support job, and that led me into doing a lot of web programming. And in 2010, I was looking around for a job, and I applied at a place for a Perl job, and I sent them a code sample, and they came back and said, "Hey, would you be willing to learn Python instead?" I said, "I guess. You'll pay me." Sure. And after I'd been there for about a month or two, they finally let me into the code base, and I realized that my Perl looks an awful lot like Python. So when you guys see my Perl code and see how it's formatted, if you're used to Python, then you'll recognize a lot of it. The rest of you that aren't, just forgive me, please. Right now I work for SaltStack. I've been working there since, well, for a very long time. I am literally the second code contributor. The only person that's been working on the code base for longer than me is Tom Hatch, the guy that created it. I'm in charge of Salt Cloud, and which actually involves a lot of things outside of Salt Cloud. It gives me the opportunity to work on a lot of APIs. And at this point, when a partner comes to us and says, "Hey, we need some integration between whatever," they come to me. And so I do a lot. Fortunately, they finally gave me a team, and so I don't have to do all that stuff now. It's nice. And side note, I am a classically trained chef. So unlike that other company that you guys may have heard of, Salt does actually have a chef. So let's talk about REST. REST is something that I first heard about actually at my first Python job. I didn't really know what it was, and I started looking at it and thinking, wait, they're doing what with it? I don't know, that HTTP wasn't really meant to be used that way. And then I started working with it more and more, and whether or not I like it, and I'm kind of used to it now, so I guess it doesn't really matter. It's actually really nice working with REST interfaces. A lot of coders are used to HTTP methods. It's a really easy protocol to work with. In fact, it's really easy to just make up your own methods and tell your web server to just use them, just to allow them to be used. And that's basically what WebDAV did, right? They added a whole, 7 new methods, I think, and used that for file transfers over HTTP. HTTP is just really easy to mess with. I've been messing with it for a long, long time. One of my hobbies is doing web scraping because I need better hobbies. But I've spent a lot of time just hacking on the protocol, hacking on the web stuff, and when I got around to REST, and in fact a couple of years into me working with REST, I discovered that a lot of that scraping that I used to do just isn't really necessary anymore. And I'll get to that in just a moment. The really cool thing about REST that oh, real quick before that, REST APIs, now that I've worked with them for kind of a while, they're very, very similar. I would say 70–80% of the REST APIs I look at nowadays are they're almost identical. They have a few things that are different just between the service in general, but the way they put together URLs and the way they use methods, it's almost identical. So once you've started working on 1 or 2 REST systems, the other ones just kind of flow together. To give you a really good example of this, one of my new team members, we were doing some pair programming last week and working on a cloud driver for GoGrid, and finally decided we were sick of dealing with the library that we were dealing with to talk to them, and decided to just rewrite it from scratch. And it took about 3 hours. That's I had never pulled up the GoGrid API docs before. I pulled them up, looked at them, started tossing together methods, and they're very, even though they're written in Python, they're very similar to the methods you're going to see me show you today in Perl. And the other important thing about REST is they connect otherwise different systems. I work in Salt a lot because, well, that's what I do, but Salt is written in Python, and I want to attract people from a lot of other systems. I did some of the Perl work to get CPAN support in there. In the past couple days, I wrote a little method or a little module that I'll show you later on for connecting Perl with Salt over REST. We've got a lot of Ruby programmers, a lot of Node programmers, a lot of Java programmers, and they just deal with it over REST. And it makes it really easy for everyone to talk to each other and not have to care what the other system is written in. So one of the things you'll find with REST is it's almost always JSON. But some of the older systems are still using XML. Now, do you guys remember when XML came out? Yeah. Remember how awesome that was? Because we already knew HTML, and XML was a lot like that, except more strict. And then, I don't know about you, but I got tired of XML after a while, and now I just can't stand it. Fortunately, JSON came around. And JSON, it's less chatty. It's a data structure that looks exactly like what you're working in whatever language you're working in anyway. It looks like a dictionary in Python. It looks like a hash in Perl. It looks like a number of other languages. Whereas XML, it was this markup language that was really good for formatting text. But when we started to try and shove data in there, we had to do things with that data that just wasn't natural. And we started adding these attributes. And then once we want to get the data back out, we have to shoehorn it back into whatever our memory structure is anyway. With JSON, you just import it, and you have a data structure that's already like what you're dealing with in Perl. So I'm a really big fan of JSON. A lot of APIs still use XML. The one that I work with all the time is Amazon, and that's just massive mounds and mounds of XML. It's terrible. In fact, theirs is easily the most complicated API I work with just in general. I work with a couple of drivers. I don't think I'm allowed to say some of these companies' names, but they are currently using XML and have a migration plan to JSON already in place, and I've seen their design docs. So even some APIs that were using XML are converting over to JSON. It's the way of the future for pretty much everyone but Java, right? If you happen to be dealing with an API that is using JSON, it's going to be just that much easier to deal with. You've got the JSON module that's really easy to import data and just shove it into whatever you're dealing with. Now, there's a number of different REST or a number of different methods available in HTTP. We don't use them all in REST, and in fact, most people don't even use all of these in REST. Do you guys know the patch method? Raise your hand if you've ever used the patch method. So a couple of you guys. It's a pretty new method. Past what, like 5 years or something. It's very new. But what a lot of people do instead of using patch is they'll use post, and instead of using put, they'll use post. So first off, just going through the list, we have get, which is a way to look at information. Either list a type of item or look at a specific entry for a particular type of item. That's generally what you'll see used for. Post is for creating a new piece of information, a new account, a new virtual machine, a new whatever. That's what post is for. Put is for replacing information that is already there with a whole new set of information. Very few people use put, which is unfortunate. They use post instead. It's actually a lot easier to deal with a lot of environments because for some reason a lot of libraries for dealing with web interfaces just don't support put or patch or a number of other things, and so you have to do weird stuff to kind of shoehorn it in there. So it's actually kind of to a lot of people's advantage that people do it wrong by using post everywhere. Same kind of thing goes with patch. That's for updating partial information. I have a record of an account and I only want to update the first name, and I want to leave everything else the same. The best way to do that is with a patch. And then delete is just for removing information entirely. Authentication. So when you start working with a lot of REST methods, the thing that really differs between a lot of different APIs is how you tell them that you are who you say you are. And in some cases, like GitHub, does anyone here use the GitHub API? Like 2 people? Okay. Unless you're actually making changes to something in GitHub or you're dealing with a repository that's private in some way, you don't need to authenticate, which is cool. It's actually a really good place to get a feel for working with REST APIs in general. And if you're actually going through and modifying repositories, putting in new issues, whatever, then you'll have to go ahead and authenticate with them. And we'll talk about GitHub in just a moment. Very commonly, you'll see something using a username and password pair. And quite frequently, this is actually a token ID is used for the username, and the token is used for the password. Very common. Another thing is a provider might just give you a token and tell you to pass it through in a header, or pass it through on a get method, or maybe even pass it through on the post body. Not as common. You see a little bit of OAuth still hanging around, a lot of OAuth 2 hanging around. Dealing with OAuth 2 APIs varies in difficulty. That's par for OAuth 2 anyway. And sometimes you'll see this signature calculation thing where you're given a token or maybe a set of tokens, and then you put it together with some other piece of information, and you send a hash based on that to the provider, and they have that same information. They calculate it, they check and see if the hash matches, and if it matches, then everyone's happy and they'll authenticate you. GoGrid was one example on Friday. They used a hash-based authentication. They just did, I think, username plus password plus token, MD5 it, and set it along in a header. That was it. And then Amazon. If any of you guys ever dealt with the Amazon API at all? It's fun, right? Have any of you guys ever had to do the signature? Yeah. For those of you that haven't, I'm going to pull this up real quick. Apologies, it is in Python, but it'll kind of get the idea. So this is the old method, signature version 2. You put together a bunch of stuff, you sign it. It's actually not very long. You go down to signature version 4, which is the current version, and it goes on and on and on. It's kind of painful. Yeah. So you'll see that occasionally, not too often. And then the one that I almost never see is client-side certificates, where you actually generate an RSA key, and you send the pub key up to the provider, and then use your private key to sign all of your messages. In fact, I only know of one API offhand that I deal with, at least, that deals with that. Any guesses? What? GCE? No, GCE uses OAuth 2. Azure. Microsoft Azure uses client-side certs. And actually, it's my favorite API to authenticate against, because I just toss a cert in there and I'm good to go. So you'll come across those different methods, and they're generally pretty well documented. The one that's not well documented at all is the Amazon signature version. They tell you what steps are there, but really they kind of expect you to use whatever SDK is available for whatever language you happen to be in. And if you're not willing to use their SDK, then screw you. So yeah, it's a fun one. Now, looking at the anatomy of a REST URL, there's a few things that you can pretty commonly see in here. There's some variations, and sometimes they don't even look like this at all. But this is very close to what you'll see, in my experience, 80 to 90% of the time. Of course, you've got the protocol, HTTP, HTTPS, and if your provider is not using HTTPS, then switch providers, right? We have a URL, which is usually just a domain name, but in some cases you might actually have a path that goes along with that. And the path will usually have some sort of version number, like V1 or V2. Storm path, they're still using a version 1 of their driver. Anyone here work with OpenStack? Most of their APIs are using version 2. And so you'll see that throughout different APIs. And then you'll see some sort of resource that you're dealing with. And occasionally you'll see some sort of action that's associated with that resource. So it's a combination of that URL and the HTTP methods that kind of define how you deal with that API. So in the case of a lot of what I deal with, what will be accessed might be a VM, or I call them instances, because like SoftLayer, for instance, actually lets you spin up bare metal, which is kind of cool. And then action would be like create, list, show, that sort of thing. So first example, GitHub. This is my all-time favorite API. It's very clean. It's very easy to work with. They give you a lot of hints for dealing with it. So let's pull that up real quick. If you just go to the straight api.github.com, this is totally unauthenticated. It tells you some of the things you can look at inside that API. It's very, very helpful, isn't it? Very awesome. And then if you want to actually go in and look at, say, in my case, I want to look at the SaltStack repos, so I'll do /repos/SaltStack, which is the organization or user, and then the actual repo that I'm looking at. And it gives me a list of, well, information about the repo itself, right? And then more links to other things you can look at to try and figure out what is supported by that repo. And then I might go into issues. And it gives me a list of currently open issues. And it's kind of a long list. We've got a few open issues. And if I want to look at a specific issue, then slash and the issue number. You see how easy it is to use the GitHub API? I love it. If you want to look at polls, and this is actually a poll, but issues and pull requests are a type of issue on GitHub, right? And this particular issue happens to be where I added in, a kind of a wrapper for dealing with various HTTP libraries inside of Salt, because, am I still working back there? Okay, thank you. I added in a bunch of, I added in a wrapper so that people that wanted to use this library could use this library, people that wanted to use this library could use this library, and so on. And it shut up a lot of people that had their own favorite library to use. So okay, looking at this, authentication on GitHub, they actually have a few different methods that they support. They support basic authentication, just HTTP-based authentication. You give it your GitHub username and password, and it lets you in. It uses OAuth too. And you can generate a token and pass it through in the header or as a Git parameter, or you can pass through a key and a secret as a Git parameter. So they're very flexible on how you deal with their API. Another API, this is Joyent. This is a cloud provider. For those of you guys that don't know Joyent, one of the big things they're kind of spearheading is a operating system called SmartOS, which is kind of a fork of OpenSolaris. And very commonly with cloud providers, you'll see a URL that has the name of the region that the data center is in. So in this case, uswest1.api.joyent.com. There's going to be a US East 1. There might be a US East 2, and so on. Very common across cloud providers. Everyone does it. We have the account. This is the account name. So in my case, it would be TechHat or SaltStack or something like that. And then slash users, or I think it's VMs or instances, and so on. And they use that same kind of signature type of authentication. You put together a username and password and I think the date, and then hash it with a key and then send it up there, and they verify it. Stormpath. Any of you guys ever heard of Stormpath? One guy? Two guys? Stormpath is basically LDAP as a service. It's got a little bit more to it than LDAP as a service. For instance, we use it in Salt as one possible method to provide external authentication. You can throw a username and password at it, and they'll tell you whether or not it's actually valid. So very, very handy. They're one of the ones that have a path in there, like I said. They're using version 1. The easy one in here is accounts. These are the actual user accounts that you're creating. And then everything else is inside what they call a tenant. And so everything kind of gets a little bit longer. In fact, let's take a look at them real quick. I've got a repo up here that I put together yesterday. This is the reason I chose StormPath is because there wasn't a Perl library for it yet, and we need Perl libraries for everything, right? Exactly. So I did StormPath, and they're excited about it. They've already started tweeting about it. They're fast. So they require an API ID and a key, and they use it just as a username and password. I've got this query sub in here, and most of my drivers use something like this. They use a sub called query. I do some basic checking, pass through the credentials, pass through the domain. Those of you guys that don't like LWP, sorry, I do. I know I'm used to it, and it's pretty common. Everyone's looked at it at least that's done web work. So we set up our credentials. We give it the path, which is going to be, well, I can hard code this one because I know that's not going to change until they go to a new version. And when they go to a new version, I have to edit the driver anyway. So I'm not worried about hard coding that. But then /resource, that's going to be generally passed in, or that's going to be always passed in, and then frequently an action is going to be passed in after that. I check and see if I'm passing through data that's going to be posted to it. And these guys, rather than using URL form encoded, they just prefer you to pass through straight JSON. So I pass it through as JSON and set the content header. I've got a special thing in here, so I don't have to do a huge amount of work to tell the difference between post, get, and delete. If I pass through data, this is delete, then I'll do a delete method. Otherwise, I'll send it through as JSON. And then I get back content. I just go ahead and decode it and return it. And everything except for delete is going to return something that looks like that. And then using the actual action, you see how easy that is? For accounts, I just pass through the name of the resource, accounts. For tenants, I pass through the tenant. In fact, most of these are tenants. Like I said, everything in StormPath is based on a tenant except for the accounts. But it's very, very simple from this point on, once you've got that query subroutine in there, to write everything else to go against it. You notice that down here, most of these are just listing data out. This is a very incomplete driver. Again, I wrote it yesterday and today. We have create, which is the first thing that's actually going to do a post. There's a few things that StormPath absolutely requires, and so I do some quick checking for that to make sure that that exists. There's a number of other fields that can be passed in as well, and so I just kind of left it freeform, said pass in these things, and we'll just kind of we'll convert it up there, right? And then when we return the response back, it's, in fact, this could really just be return self-query, right? Updating account is even easier. You pass through a hash ref that's got the, item equals this, and so on. And it does well, in these guys' case, it does a post, but it should be doing a patch, right? And then delete, I just give it an account ID and tell it to delete it. You guys see how easy it is to work with some of the APIs? So let me look at another one here. This is my last example. I'm going kind of fast, sorry guys. I guess that means we've got plenty of time for questions. So Salt API, of course I'm going to toss this in here, a little bit of promo, right? Actually this is an API I deal with quite a bit. And I noticed there wasn't a Perl library for it, so again, I wrote that this week, in part so I could use it in the talk. The URL is going to be whatever your Salt master is set to. The resource is going to be, there's actually only a few resources on the Salt API. There's minions, there's jobs, maybe one other thing. There's not a whole lot that's available. And optionally a resource ID, depending on what you're actually doing. And they just use, what they do in Salt API is they'll use basic authentication to get a token, and then they'll pass that token through as a header or as a parameter. Or there's another way of accessing it where you just pass through username and password every single time. So let's take a look at that driver real quick. You see it's already starting to look very similar. I start off by, if you call a new, then you give it a username and password and it just goes ahead and auto-generates a token for you. If you want, you can generate another token halfway through, but it's not going to reassign it to the session. That was just in there just in case, I guess. And then I've only got support right now for 3 types of functions in there. An execution command, this is the thing where it goes to the salt master and says, talk to these minions, tell them to do something, and then the minions do something, and they come back and they tell the master. What this actually does is it goes and sends out the command and gets a job ID back. And then I've got this other jobs function that can be used to look at the job data for that job ID. And then run is the one that actually hits it directly every single time. So, come to think of it, I've got some code up here. I should probably hop into there and take a look at it. So this is the salt one. Accessing that is very easy. Paul, go ahead and write down the password. It's very useful. No, it's not. So I set up a salt object, and then I run a job. And then I print out the output from the job. This is a job that doesn't have any arguments, just a test.ping, tells you who's actually responding. In fact, I could really just do everyone instead of Dufresne. You guys can see I've got 4 different methods set up here, so when I go over here and say Salt API, awesome. Oh. So it really helps if you start stuff up before you try to hit it. So the Salt API daemon is now actually running. And we'll toss a few things at it, and it's probably still spinning up, I hope. It looks as I'm getting as lucky as everyone else has been doing live demos so far. What? Okay, so I guess we won't see that. That is unfortunate. Yeah. Okay. I'll just leave that up there. So I've kind of buzzed through this and went through much, much faster than I expected to. And I'm sure you guys have lots of questions, and I'm happy to go in and start looking at APIs with you and all that. Does anyone have any questions for me? Did I make it that easy? Yes, sir. What I should have done is check to see if there was actually JSON output, maybe drop an eval around it. I'm sorry, the question was, how do I deal with messages like this where the server's not up so it didn't return valid JSON? I'd probably wrap an eval around it or do a try block with, is it try tiny? Do something that actually validates the information before trying to pass it through to the JSON encoder or decoder. Good question. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Where I work, the API has, since its inception about 6 years ago, outputted XML. And I know there's been some experiments in terms of having it output JSON as well, but I don't think that has made it to production yet.
Okay. Okay, so the question is, are there any traps that somebody might come across when trying to support both JSON and XML? And a lot of these APIs do actually support both already. And one I was working with, I think GoGrid supports CSV as well. There are some traps because the way you deal with them is generally very different. I used to use XML simple kind of a lot. I know it's got big warnings all over it now saying don't use this because really the information you get back from it doesn't look great if there's even one attribute, XML attribute. However, if you don't use attributes inside your XML, it still actually converts very easily to a hash, and you can treat it the same way as all your other JSON stuff. However, that's not usually the reality. The best I can say is to put together a test framework that tosses similar information to both and expects similar information back. Sorry, that's not a very helpful answer, but the problem is just that because the two data formats are so dissimilar, putting together functions to just handle the type of data you get back are going to look very different. These functions up here, this guy here, job, if it were dealing with XML coming back, it would probably have a few extra lines just to reformat the XML into something that looks similar to the data structure you're dealing with normally.
Yeah, well, just to clarify my question, I, or the company I work for, is actually sending the output. And, you know, I'm talking about our migration path from just providing XML as output to providing both XML and JSON.
Right.
I was wondering if you've ever been in that situation or you know of problems that the API provider might encounter.
One big thing that you're going to come across is knowing which. So the question is in sending information, sending it via XML or JSON, and are there pitfalls there? One thing that I see a lot are APIs that don't make it easy to specify which type of data you want to get back. GoGrid was one where they actually had a field where you say what type of data you're expecting, and if you don't tell it, then it comes back in JSON. And I'm sure at some point it came back by default in XML, and they switched to that over at some point and hopefully warned their customers, though I've come across a lot of APIs where they don't. Speaking of that, don't change your APIs once they're in production. I've worked with a couple of companies, I won't say who, but I have actually had cloud providers that will change their API without changing the version number or anything and tell somebody a day or two later on the blog post when people start complaining. Another interesting one, what's that? Yeah, they fixed it. If you look at StormPath, they have, you see here we have a content type application in JSON. That's for what you're expecting to receive back. But they also have this accept header. So you can actually say in your API, look at the accept header or the content type header, find out what the person is actually expecting through that, and receive back information properly. As long as their clients are properly using HTTP anyway, which would normally send that, they don't have to mess around with any other weird variables or anything. That's one of the big ones that I see, is just in properly identifying which type of data you're going to return back. And the other one is just when you start sending back JSON, it just looks so much different. I'm going to assume that you're using attributes in your current XML, right?
I believe so.
Right.
I never quite remember what attribute means in which language or application.
Oh, in this case, it's inside your tags, name equals double quote value.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you're using those, it's not going to translate cleanly over to JSON. And most APIs that I deal with don't use that. I want to say that SoftLayer doesn't use attributes in their XML, so it's actually very easy to convert. But they are the exception. So yeah, trying to rework the data model into something that makes sense to your users and makes sense in JSON and makes sense to your product, that's really the biggest part. Okay, did I answer your question well enough? Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So if you're trying to interface with a service without an API that doesn't have a Perl like SDK, I guess the original one here with StormPath,
Yeah.
is there any type of modules that you've seen on
So the question is, if you're dealing with a service that doesn't have a Perl module for it yet, is there a good tool out there already, such as on CPAN, that can make it easy to work with that? I'm probably not the right person to ask because I've spent not nearly enough time in Perl at all for the past 5 years. I have not seen anything in looking around in the past few days. I've seen a number of different drivers that are very disparate in how they function and which namespace they decided to use and so on. So far, I've tentatively chosen web service for my namespaces for these because it seems to be the most accurate. And in fact, a buddy of mine back there, Harley, and I were talking about this yesterday about whether to use API or www or so on. And I've seen APIs just all over the place, and it's really confusing. Find one that you like that has a good interface and take a look at the code. I've thought about that as well, and this Stormpath module is really, really young, and it's going to change probably a lot in the next few days, but I would like it to be a model that people could use potentially in the future. So take a look at it in the next couple weeks and see if it's helpful to you. What I generally do when writing code in general is I'll distill it down to one method is fast to write and to read and to maintain, and just kind of stick with that for all my stuff. And in the case of Salt Cloud, it's made things really easy to create. And in this case, I wrote the Salt API one first, and then I copied over the PM file and wrote the Stormpath one. The Salt API one took me 2 or 3 hours to write. Stormpath first version was about 20 minutes. So does that help answer your question? Awesome. Any other questions? Okay. If you guys want copies of the source code or anything, or want to yell at me, I'm up on GitHub, Twitter, IRC, and I'll have links to the slides, and I hope they're taping this too, and when that comes out, I'll put a link to it on my blog as well. Okay.